One common use of for loops is to process tabular data. We do this using something called the nested for loop or nested for loops. Tabular data are data that are organized in rows and columns. Think of a spreadsheet as an example of tabular data. We'll get a good chance to work with tabular data when we get to the section of this course on multidimensional arrays. But for right now, we'll just give you a feel for what it's like, primarily to work with nested for loops. Let's start with a graphical example. Imagine you've been given the task of creating the following graphic, which is just a series of 5 rows and 5 columns of asterisks across your screen. No, not very useful, but it's an interesting problem to solve with nested for loops. How would you create that using nested for loops? Well, here's how you do it. A nested for loop just means that you have an inner loop and an outer loop. The inner loop controls the columns, imagine going across the screen or across the data, and the outer loop controls the rows going down the columns or down the data. So we'll create the outer loop by creating a loop control variable row, set it to 1. We want it to run until it's equal to 5, so we'll write the condition as less than or equal to 5. And each time through the loop, we're going to increment row by 1. That's the outer loop. The inner loop is very similar. This time we're going to call the loop control variable col for column. Set it to 1. Also set its relational expression to run until it's equal to 5, and increment it by 1 each time through. The body of the inner loop simply has to write a star or asterisk to the screen, and that's all it has to do. It will do this for the first row 5 times, because for each time the outer loop runs, the inner loop will run 5 times. Then, when the inner loop is finished, we'll write out a new line so that we can drop down to the next row and then go back through the inner loop again. And that's all there is to it. We're starting at the left-hand corner, printing an asterisk, moving across to the right 4 more times, dropping down a line, and then doing the same thing. And then continue that until we've done 5 rows. Here's the program. Let's build and run. See what we get. And there you go. Again, not very practical, but an interesting example. Let's modify this graphic a bit and let's try to recreate the following pattern. Each time we move down a row, we add 1 to the number of stars that we write, so that we get a pattern like this. Here's how we would do it in the program. Let's start over again. I could just modify this program, but let's start over again just to make things a little clearer. We'll start with our outer loop. Very same code this time. Now, the inner loop will be a little bit different. We want the column variable, or the loop control variable column, to start at 1. This time we only want it to go, if that's the word for it, until it equals the number of the row that we're on. Because the first row has 1 star, the second row has 2 stars, the third row has 3 stars, and so on and so forth. The rest of the program looks exactly the same. Close the inner loop, write out a new line to take us to a new row, and close out the outer loop. There's the program. Let's build and run. And there we get the pattern. For our last example, let's do something just a touch more practical, but still isn't going to make you any money. Let's print out the times tables 1 through 5. Again, that's a good example of tabular data, or at least a tabular pattern, that we can easily create using nested for loops. And like I said, when we get to this section on multidimensional arrays a little bit later in the course, we'll do some real true work with nested for loops. So here we're going to start off much the same way. Set our row equal to 1. Rows less than or equal to 5. I guess I like the number 5 today. And increment row by 1. The inner loop works the same way. All right. In the body of the inner loop, what we want to do is we want to write out, see out the row, then the multiplication sign. Whoops, left out an operator there. The row number followed by the column number, followed by an equal sign. We better drop down to the next line, we're getting a little busy here. Followed by the actual arithmetic expression, row times column, followed by a tab, so that we can tab from 1 times 1 equals 1, tab to 1 times 2 equals 2, tab to 1 times 3 equals 3, and so on and so forth. So that's the end of the inner loop. For the outer loop, we also want to do a new line so that we move to the next row before the next row of numbers is printed. And that should complete the program. Let's build and run. And there we go. And notice the tab makes it very neat and structured. When we get to the section on multidimensional arrays, you'll see a practical use for nested for loops. But for now, at least we see the pattern that you follow when you're processing data using nested for loops.